for joining. Thank you guys that are here. This is the Student Success Center's first workshop of the new year, 2022. Yeah. So I'm Kathy DeFazio. I am the coordinator at the Student Success Center. Our director is Alika Cullison, and we are so excited to have everybody here. Natalia Lima is here also. She's one of our peer tutors, and Liz Alexander is also one of our peer tutors too. So all connectable. Just call us if you need anything. We're here to help you guys be successful. So I am here to introduce Professor Mark Lopez, the amazing English professor here at TKU. And he is all things English and makes English a really fun subject. He's our grammar nerd. Can I call you our grammar nerd?
Sure.
Okay, because that's a good thing, because like Grammar Girl has a whole podcast on it. She's very famous, so we'll be looking for you. So thank you very much. Really appreciate you.
I know we have a lot of people over here in the corner, three, and I know we have a lot of people online, so that's really cool. I'm excited about this. I love getting to teach this workshop. I was joking with Alika that they're coming down from an hour to about 30 minutes. I guess after the reviews of the last workshop, so I guess we'll find out why ultimately. So, but I'm very excited to teach this workshop. I love English. I love getting to teach English. I have my MFA in creative writing from University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. I joined the staff here a couple years ago at TKU as a recruitment coordinator and also as an adjunct for English. I've been teaching English here at TKU for about 2.5, almost like 3 years in that range. Now I'm the Associate Director of Academic Technology. So anything Blackboard related, that's kind of what I look over in my purview. But I get to teach English. I get to teach 1301 and 1302, and I really love both, and specifically 1301, because I feel like when you're teaching English, you get super nervous as a student when you first walk in. I feel like off the bat, you think, I'm going to learn a lot of grammar, which is great. I'm going to learn a lot of structure, and I'm going to learn just a lot of things that are not super fun when you say them out loud, like structure and writing. And we lose a passion for writing, I think, in a lot of ways because of that kind of apprehension that you have. You kind of lose this idea of why you're actually writing in the first place. And I know this is a revising workshop. We're going to go over that for sure, but I am a firm believer that revising, I'm going to give you some tools, and they're going to be super helpful as you all work through your essays in the next couple months. But revising is firmly 40% tools, 60% mentality. What's the point of having these tools if you are not emotionally or mentally ready to revise? If you feel afraid to look at your work? If you are just nervous to even look at a paper that you just finished? I feel that pain all the time. And I can't wait to help share that with y'all, because I think I'm going to give y'all some great tools, like I said, but I think most importantly, I'm going to help y'all really help talk to yourself and be excited about writing and be excited about revising, because it really is, in a way, how we communicate. So I kind of always start with a fun story that I say to everyone that comes to these sessions. I was in my first semester of my graduate program. I was doing a class on theory of rhetoric. If you're wondering what that sounds like, it is incredibly theoretical and incredibly boring sometimes. But I remember, so this is like my first semester in my grad program, so I'm super pumped. Kind of like one of the young guys there. I'm like maybe 24 at the time, so I'm like, yeah, like I'm super cool, like don't worry about me, I'm fine. And I turn in this super long essay. The essay was just supposed to be like, what do you think about rhetoric? I turn in a 5-page essay, super great bullet pointed paragraphs, everything, great citations, all that cool stuff. And I'm super proud. I can't wait to get an A from the professor, and he could be like, he's a genius, he's awesome. So I turned in this paper, and then I get the paper back a week later after turning that in, and then I get told that I have one good sentence in my entire essay. Only one good sentence. And I was like, I just wrote like 2,500 words. What do you mean? Like I have one good sentence. Like this is like my Opus Dei type of thing. This is like what Shakespeare does when he wrote Romeo and Juliet. I'm proud of this. And then he tells me, you have one sentence that is clear and concise, and that is actually your thought. And that was the second part that was most important. That is actually originally your thought, not something that you're rehashed from another essay, not something that you are just re-quoting and re-quoting over and over, but something that is original and true to you and you delivered it well. And that is what he meant by saying you have one good sentence in this entire paper. And that's what I really try to work towards with my students and in my class. Just the other day, for my students, we had an assignment that was, tell me about a hero in a literary novel. And 7 of them turned in, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary definition of hero, this is what a hero means. And I told them straight up, like, guys, if you tell me one more sentence like this, I'm gonna puke. like, I swear, like, that's the truth. And I meant that in the most positive way in terms of, like, I don't care what the dictionary has to say about this item. I care about what you have to say about this item. And I am constantly trying to work towards figuring out how to best help them revise their original idea and get them back to saying an original thought. Because you have a very finite time in education, maybe 4 to 5 years, to actually be original for once and to actually say something for once. I think all of us that know that when we work in professional environments, you don't have a lot of freedom to always say what you want to say and kind of experiment and be a little free. Education is a beautiful entity because it allows you to do exactly that. I feel like somewhere along the way, we forgot that a long time ago. And it's about working our way back to that idea of creating original thought and revising our original thoughts. And that is important to me. As someone that loves education, that loves being in the school, I love being able to step out on a limb and not feel exactly sure where I'm going, but I'm trying to at least have an original idea again. So I'm gonna go over some tips here. We're gonna go over some revising tips, and we're gonna imagine this as if you just wrote an essay in a lot of ways. Imagine if you just turned in the first draft of an essay and you were not exactly too sure about it. And we're gonna kind of go from there, but I just wanna ask from really the get-go, and if you're online, you can totally share your opinions too and your thoughts. How many of us really love writing essays? You have Natalia over here, kind of shaking your hand. How many of us completely 100% dread writing an essay and getting the feedback pretty automatically? Yeah, kind of solid.
I'm the only one.
I dread it too. How many of us hate the idea of revising an essay, of looking back at a work that you just turned in and trying to work it? Yes, perfect, great, that's exactly what I want. So that's exactly what I'm looking for. Anyone online, if you want to say like, yeah, I hate revising, it's worse, that is 100% okay. If you love revising, that is awesome. What did Joey say? I love essays right in general, and we should go there too. Awesome, Joey. Joey, that is awesome.
No, I hate revising too.
Oh, perfect. A man of duality. That's what I respect. That's great. So that's awesome. So if you love essays and you love revising, that's awesome. If you hate essays and hate revising, that is equally as awesome. Because that is what we're trying to work at doing. We're trying to work at getting ourselves comfortable to revise and seeing what that means in revising an essay. So that's something that I'm really passionate about in working, is that, you know, it's okay to hate this topic. It's okay to really not be super excited. But I think if we could get ourselves excited and get ourselves open, that is already more than half the work done of revising in itself. Revising is returning to the work. And I'm not going to lie, that is my nightmare too. I, for instance, with my MFA program, did a thesis. Of course, you have to graduate, you got to do a thesis. It took me a year to read that thesis again after I fully graduated. And that's the truth. I did an entire thesis. It was about 150 pages of, you know, writing. And it took me a year to read it once again, just because I was afraid of like looking back and saying like, wow, I was really bad a year ago. And that's normal. Even someone who goes through an entire English program, that is normal. This seminar is not going to make you a perfect writer. It's going to make you more a reflective one. I'm not a perfect writer. I don't think anyone ever will be. I definitely never will be. But I think I'm a pretty reflective writer, and I think that kind of helps along the way. So you crafted a draft, or at least have made something that looks like an essay. You have made a piece of paper with a bunch of words on it, and it has a pretty good flow, and you reach to the conclusion. That is a great first start for a first draft. I tell my students all the time, the first draft, literally, if you just get the words down on the paper, you've already done more than enough. It's always about starting. That is always the hardest part. The first draft is meant to at least get the ball rolling and get some momentum. And if you have, at least turned in something that's already perfect. I never really expect too much from the first draft for my classes. I just want my students to see if they understand the question that they're asking in the essay. That's going to be important here in a bit. So hopefully you've crafted a draft and you're not turning in the first thing you wrote. That's kind of the big thing. Hopefully you're not turning in your final essay as the essay that you wrote. Meaning that if you're turning in a final essay, that it's not your first time writing it, because that's not exactly super helpful for your final grade in the future. You kind of want to give yourself steps to work your way backwards. But the main thing I really want to focus on is the difference between revising and editing globally versus editing locally. So what does that mean? So revising and editing are very different. Revising is essentially looking at your entire thesis of your essay and seeing if it makes sense. Did you actually get to the conclusion the way that you wanted to? Are these the exact structure that you made the way that it was designed to have the most effective essay in general? Editing is where you start to get to the nitty-gritty detail of it all. The grammar, the punctuation, the structure, all that. Once we kind of separate those two topics of revising and editing, I think it kind of becomes a little bit clearer in terms of which path you go down for which specific time. And one way that I like to do that is telling my students, are you editing globally or locally in your essay? Globally, meaning, are you editing your essay literally by reading your entire paper and seeing, does it make sense? Does this paragraph actually line up here? Or does it sound too repetitive over here? If you are editing globally, you're looking at how that looks like an entire structure in itself. It's kind of like, working large to working small. So global editing is exactly looking at that. You're looking at the entire theme of the paper, seeing if the structure makes sense, seeing if you actually get to the right conclusion, and seeing if you essentially just crafted an essay that says an original thought and says it effectively. Editing locally is when you start to get real to the nitty-gritty detail. When you look at punctuations, when you look at grammar, when you look at editing. This is a great tip for that. If honestly, you kind of want to save correctness for last with it. So I'm going to run the board. I know it's probably not super helpful for those that are kind of watching it, but I think that will kind of help. So we have revising. We have editing. And if you've ever in my class, you would know that after about 3 words, my handwriting goes all down the drain. Yeah, revising globally and editing locally. And one tip for this is you want to save this for last. Because if you are working on grammar first, are you actually still working on the theme of your essay? No, I don't think so. This kind of goes back to my first story. I wrote an essay that was perfectly structured. It looked great. It looked fantastic. I said nothing. And that's what I really look for in my essays. Are my students actually trying to say something? If they're just, like I said, rehashing all these quotes that other people have said before them, not super helpful to me. I want them to say something. And our professors want you to say something. All your professors, all your faculty, everyone has read journals and journals and journals and books and books and books to get to this very moment of teaching. They know the thoughts, they've read the thoughts, they've engaged in the thoughts. Once you get to your master's and you go past it, you're engaging with thoughts and originality, and you're trying to put your own voice to it. So we don't want to hear rehashing of thoughts. We want to see what our students are trying to say about a subject. So we try, and I try to recommend saving locally, saving the grammar editing for last, because I really want my students to see if they are actually, saying something important in the essay itself, if that makes sense. Now that you are starting to look globally, and we're gonna go back over here since we're editing here first. How many of us actually make outlines for our essays? Yeah, yeah, anyone online? Does anybody make an outline? Great, thank you. Oh, thank you.
Request that.
If they request it. That's good. No, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah. I'm not immune to the fact that you guys have lives outside of this situation. That, you know, I need to make like a really good outline for 8 hours a day and then get started on my essay the next 8 hours. No, that's not going to happen. It's all about kind of working when you have time. But outlines are fantastic. And honestly, even for this seminar, it's about finding the right outline for you. For instance, you have outlines that go, you know, 1, 2, 3 dots in between. That's kind of like the standard outline look. You have, you know, thesis, supporting, and conclusion. Obviously, you don't want a 3-paragraph essay for your final, but it's kind of an example. And that works for a lot of people. It actually doesn't work for me. What I do is honestly, you know, even to get ready for this seminar, I literally just wrote a paper of questions all the way down. I wrote a paper of questions that I wanted to cover for myself to remind myself a lot of things. I literally, if you look at my little outline that I have for the seminar, it's literally just bullet points and questions all the way down. It looks like in some ways a serial killer kind of wrote it in some ways, or like a weird manifesto. And that's okay, because it's about finding the way that works for you. Writing is always about finding the thing that works best for you in your situation. So instead of doing this, I will often just ask myself questions literally like, what do I mean? And where does this fit? And then for the seminar example, I'll put revising in a question mark 3 times. And I'll try to answer that myself. And I'll try to work in that way. And that works in my mind because that's how I like to have a dialogue with what I write. I feel like if I have a dialogue with what I'm writing, I know how to kind of formulate it in my own head. But that's not going to work for everyone. People need different acts of structure. People need different modes of organizing that. But the reason why I do love outlines, and I've been told that I'm a guy that needs outlines a lot, so that's 100% okay. I'm a guy that could kind of talk about a million different directions in a span of 5 minutes, and no one will kind of know what's going on. So I need to outline a lot. But one reason what's great about an outline is doing a reverse outline for when you're editing globally. So you want to try to start with the end. You create a draft and it is all right, and you get a solid A or B, and you want to try to make something clear. What was the ending that you ended up at? What was the answer that you got? Was it clear? Was it not clear? Was it something that if you were to show a reader that they would end up at the same conclusion that you did? Or did it not kind of end up there? And most of the times if someone is saying, you know, I don't think this conclusion fits with the essay, that's when you got to start looking at your essay in terms of a global context and seeing where does it kind of fall off the tracks. And it's 100% normal for it to fall off the tracks. It's not bad or anything like that. It's just, it happens. Why did that happen? Because when you're writing essays, when we are crafting these essays, like even myself, I will write an essay for about like 20 minutes, or I'll write for about 20 minutes, and then I will look at my phone, and then I'll be like, okay, sorry, got to put it back. And then I'll be like, you know what, I'm really hungry though. So then I'll go to my fridge, and then I'll be like, you know what, I also didn't get to see this YouTube video from the other day. And then I'm like, man, I should really probably know about how to make a good French toast. And then I'll look at this French toast video for like an hour. But this is what happens. Yeah, you know, we're not like locked in the room writing. Yeah, settle down.
Hour, no half hour, no 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, like I gave myself a good amount of time. And that's okay too. When I was writing my thesis, I had to give myself, you know, 2 hours a day to actually write. And honestly, in that 2 hours a day, I was still writing, making coffee, writing, you know, playing with my dog at the time, you know, whatever. But it happens, you know, it's about how you, the way that we write and the way that we engage in writing often reflects what we're reading as a reader later on. So if you're taking breaks from when you're writing, I could tell when my student had a random hour spurt of writing really good, and then they're like, I'm gonna go do something else for a bit. And that's true. As a professor, you can kind of tell when a student had a train of thought that lasted for a little while and then they returned a little later. Because the essay feels like that in some ways. Essays are organic. This is something that I really try to tell my students, essays are extensions of thought. It is essentially communication. I hate the idea of an essay being a one-dimensional figure. Essays are an organic communication of thought, and that's special. So you can also kind of tell when that train of thought leaves in some ways. It just feels like something stopped and started again. So reversing the outline, if you didn't get to the outline, if you didn't get to the conclusion that you want, then that means that you got to start looking at it globally again and figuring out where it went. And one thing that really doesn't help us when we're doing this is, I like to bring it up with my students, are you looking at a topic or are you looking at a question? And what parts of your essay don't help you with that? So this kind of goes over here. So topic focus versus question focus. What is the difference between these two, if anyone wants to try to answer that? Topic versus question focus.
We don't know the answer, right? We're just trying to figure it out ourselves.
Yeah, and when you're looking at a topic, say your topic is, if I'm going to bring in an example from one of our classes topic, or even my class topic is 19th century literature. Cool, that's huge. That's something that professors have written hundreds and hundreds of books over and so haven't really fully covered. If I asked the question, why was, Pride and Prejudice so important to 19th century literature in America? Then we start getting a little more exact with that. Then we start getting into specific details and we can find specific answers with it. When you're revising your essay, you really got to ask yourself, am I looking over a topic or am I trying to answer a question? If you're looking over a topic, that's fine. That works for some essays. But are you essentially leaving and hurting yourself because your essay is too vague? Your essay is trying to answer too large of a thought, too big of a thought, that you're kind of hurting yourself at the same time. One way to kind of begin this is your title actually hurting you? How many of y'all just write for your title essay for class or essay for New Testament or New Testament essay or New Testament theology or any of these kind of like large, yes, somewhere, yeah. These titles, it's a solid title. I've had students turn in an essay title like just, research paper. That's fine. That doesn't really tell me anything about the research paper. But if you're starting your title with a large topic, that kind of gets lost with you as a writer too. If your title is something a little more specific, instead of research paper, it's, the rhetorical effects of modern day church, or, the rhetorical effects of social media in today's church and things like that, topics I would cover in my class. Then we start getting to specifics, and then you start knowing where you want your essay to kind of end up at the same time. So your title can hurt you. Your title can hurt you if it's not exactly clear enough, if you're setting yourself already up at a vague understanding of what you want to write. And then after that, if you're going to a large topic, you're essentially just going to end up doing something that I think happens to a lot of us, which is we throw up information in some ways. We just literally spewed out all the research that we found. We just write it and write it and write it, and then we end up at a paper and we're like, cool. And then we don't actually see if that paper actually connects with a lot of things. We just, toss up all this information and see if it works on a paper. And that's okay. That's a great place to start. That's a fantastic place to start because you want to get all your stuff out at the same time. You want to get all your puzzle pieces out on the table. But you also want to not leave it there, because as a professor myself, I could tell when students just kind of throw everything at the window and see what sticks. For this seminar, for even example, I had a million different points to cover. I'm not gonna get to these million points I know in the time allotted. So I had to, kind of weed my way through it and see what was the most important and what could I leave behind. For instance, I had a lot of games. We're not gonna do any games, but I had a lot of games planned. But I was like, I probably shouldn't be doing that in the time being. It's about figuring out the focus of that. But we could throw up ideas left and right. If it doesn't connect and it's not cohesive, there's no point to that. It's about finding that connection point through it. So you want to outline for that reason. You want to outline to not spew out information. You want to outline to help you decide, are you getting to your conclusion effectively? In this outline, you can figure out, are you writing a topic or are you writing a question? And then ultimately, are you answering your entire essay, and does it connect to the title that you have in the beginning? Essays are cohesive and should be cohesive thoughts that all connect to each other and that answer a succinct idea. And you don't want to lose that in some ways. So, is your title hurting you? Topic versus question, reverse outline. Another thing I like to talk over is, now we're going to start looking at editing locally. Really getting down to the nitty-gritty detail. When you all revise your essays, what's kind of like your first step? I could know.
Call Success Center.
Call Success Center. Call Kathy. She is great. Yeah.
All righty,
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
I like to read it out loud and see if it flows well.
That's perfect. No, that's great. That's awesome. That's actually what exactly I'm going to say. The first step that I always recommend is reading your essays out loud.
Or have your computer read it out loud.
Or have the machine do it. And that's how the machines will take over in the future. That's where it would all come from.
Someone.
Yeah, read it out loud. Read it to someone. Grammar check is good for sure, they can tell you. But reading out loud is fantastic because as we are reading and as we kind of learn to read, if it sounds off as you're reading it verbally, it is probably because it is off itself. If it sounds like a sentence is a little jumbled and not exactly coherent, it probably is because it's not coherent. If it sounds like a really long sentence and you've been talking for like 30 seconds, you probably have a run on. That is kind of how that happens. But sentences are, a creation that y'all put together. When you have a comma, for instance, a comma indicates what?
Breathing.
Breathing, yeah. A comma indicates a pause. It indicates a stop. But it doesn't indicate a separation of two very succinct ideas. It indicates a continual succession from one idea to the finishing half of that same idea. When you have a period, the period, one gives a reader a pause, but also indicates a succinct idea was already formed. We can continue to the next idea, and we could say something very similar, but if it sounds too similar from one before the period to after the period, then you have something that sounds a little repetitive. Then you have an idea that sounds a little bit off. So these context clues, and then you get to the fancy stuff that I don't usually recommend to students, but semicolon, colon, you can use that. You don't necessarily need it. I'll say it's a little safer not to. But you look at these items, and these are all places for your reader, not just for you, to understand what and how you're trying to communicate a piece of idea. You are indicating to your reader where you want them to pause, where you want them to stop, where you want the next idea to continue to the next thing. A paragraph break is exactly the same thing too. If a paragraph, as you're reading aloud, sounds too repetitive from one paragraph to another, it probably is a repetitive couple sets of paragraphs. Professors, we don't usually like that. We do a giant X on the paper over a paragraph, which is like super hurtful, but that's kind of how we communicate. But these sentence structures are great because that's how you figure out what sounds off in your sentence. Yes?
I missed that point about the paragraphs. What do you not like?
Yeah, so if a paragraph break is there, if there's two different paragraphs, if both paragraphs sound basically saying the same thing, just put it back into one or, delete one, and that's okay. It's all about finding what works best. And when you're editing locally, a lot of times, in the writing context, we always like to say it's kind of like trimming the fat off an essay. You're making it succinct. You're making it concise with it. It's going to hurt, but you're going to often do, a 7-page essay. And when you actually do editing locally really well, you become a 4-page essay or a 5-page essay. And that's kind of unfortunate because then you're like, oh, no, I just lost a couple pages, so that's great. But it makes your essay more focused, and it makes your essay a lot clearer, and it makes your essay a lot more powerful in a lot of ways. So you want to try to, if you're editing locally and you're cutting down pages, then you're doing really, really, really good. If you're editing locally and you're like, one sentence was off about it, you probably should go back and read through it and make sure that it looks well. So you want to read out loud. That's often the best thing. It is often not super fun, but locally means, focusing on the finer points of grammar, editing, sentence structure.
You know the semicolons used?
Yeah, semicolons are a little funny. So semicolons are kind of used when you're like writing a sentence and it continues to a next idea, but it's a little bit clear of a separation with it. I often tell students with semicolons and colons and, getting really fancy and, M dashes, all that stuff, just avoid it if you can. It's not a big deal. If a student does a essay that has nothing but, easy sentences throughout, which is like subject and verb, then you're good to go. Hey,
it says Dr. Carlson coming in.
okay, no problem. Cool. Yeah. So you kind of want to stay a little succinct with that. You kind of want to only use commas, periods where you can. If you do want to get fancy, you totally can. I think we often think that formal writing requires a lot of, super cool, detailed sentence structure pieces. Often it doesn't. Often formal writing just requires good, solid sentences. And also, just taking out the idea of I and me and you and, making it succincter piece of writing. So going back to this, editing locally, you also want to figure out who are you trying to speak to with this in terms of audience. And when you think of audience, I just talked about formal writing. Are you writing formally or informally with it? When I have my essays for class, I have an essay that is completely informal. I tell my students, you just write it how you think it sounds cool. I have an essay that is then semi-informal, which is kind of like a theory paper. I have them, kind of add a little more structure to it, add a little more voice and characteristics. Then we get to the research paper, and then it's completely formal. And we're working our way down and down until we find the right voice. Why do I do that? Because I think if you go the other way and you go from formal to informal, you lose a lot of things that are special. You lose a lot of ideas of voice and characteristics of your own writing. So I think working from informal to formal is best. For formal writing is what you see in academic journals, what you see in research papers, what you see things that are going to be published outside of what you're doing, not for nearly creative work, but for academic work. Then informal is where you really get to use your own point of view and your own voice and adding me and just what I feel. I think this could be better in the church. I want to write this for, a blog or a creative piece. But you want to figure out, what is this paper for? What is the audience for this paper for? And between those, then you could start working on, okay, now that I know it's a formal paper, a formal research paper, do I get to the conclusion? Is it also written formally? Am I trying to sound too impressive and too smart? Or am I trying to sound like myself? Yeah.
I am identifying with what you're saying because I just wrote my first reflections paper
Yeah.
in a Bible class. And I started off with it being formal. And then I did a quick search to see what other reflection papers look like online. And it was very informal and very reflective with the I. So I ended up, and I didn't have time to switch it all out, but I ended up with half of the reflections paper formal, the second half informal, because I figured out that that's probably what he's looking for. And I threw it in there and just sent it off. So, and there weren't any like corrections per se, but there were a few points knocked off. And I decided myself it was because of that. It was my first one in ever, really. Yeah. But I think I figured it out, but it's literally what you're saying. I missed it.
It's okay.
in the beginning anyway. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, definitely, I think it's better to go from informal to formal. And of course, you could always ask your professor, what they're kind of expecting with this. But I think when you go from formal to informal, when you go the other way around, you lose something special in some ways. You kind of lose this idea that you wanted to say originally. So I try to work the other way with my students. I try to tell them like, hey, you could expand your boundaries with writing really easily. And then when you got to clean it up, we could clean it up together. But I really rather see your original train of thought before I start seeing you kind of put that thought into a sentence structure, into a structure in itself. And that's something that's really valuable to me. So I know a lot of your professors kind of think that way too. But it's always about approaching that and always kind of clarifying where you want to be. Yes.
So I did the reflection paper already, and now I'm starting with the book review.
Okay.
See, and so it's good because you don't need all that formatting as much.
Yeah.
And but to do the skim reading, if you have a 300-page and a 200-page book and do in a week, what
Yeah.
are your like quick tips on that? To skim read or to do 1-page outline, 2-page outline?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So if you have to read, multiple books in a week and you got to try to put this entire essay together, that's insanely really tough. I think you always kind of want to give yourself some time to not really just read the stuff, but we want to give yourself time to allocate breaks in an essay. Not just give yourself time to write the essay, but give yourself time to also rest from the essay. I think that's really important in revising. I write knowing that I want to give myself at least like 2 days to go back and rewrite it again, or 2 days to go back and research it again. So probably timing will help there, but I think what you want to try to do, especially in that kind of case, is, if you have these books in front of you, you're trying to comment, what are these kind of main points that you've seen, even from online, that these books are saying? What have people that have read the books before you've said about these pieces? Plagiarism is definitely really bad, and don't ever plagiarize. But engaging with thoughts is not bad. Engaging with what people have said before you in these books is not bad, and kind of helping put the context clues of what people have said before you isn't bad at all. I tell my students, we're going to do a lot of peer reviews. You're going to get a lot of feedback. Don't copy your fellow classmates' work, but definitely learn from them and learn their techniques and their traits and what they do. And then take what you want and what you don't want from a paper. So if you definitely don't have time to read a book in a day, which happens, look online, see what thoughts have been said about the book, and what have you gathered from the book, and how does that work together? Yeah.
I didn't know that you could go somewhere and look at other people's reviews of things like that we're working on here. When I looked at the reflection paper, it was more of a generalized, like what does a reflection paper even mean and how is it laid out, and spoken in the first person. But like, where would you go to even look at other people's
Reviews? Yeah, like Google searches, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely Google, JSTOR. The library has a lot of fantastic material. So definitely, really any one of those will help you with it and kind of help figure out where it's supposed to be. But yeah, the library has a lot of fantastic resources, but anyone in student success could kind of help you find information there too.
The Blackboard or the other research tools have
Yeah.
examples of different essays.
Yeah, and also you can even go to like Google and then just type in, a topic that is kind of being covered in the book or an idea being covered in the book, and then you could receive a bunch of great information from it there too.
What do you like to read when you read book critiques?
When I read book critiques, yeah, I definitely I'll read the thing multiple times, like the actual essay or book multiple times. But then I will, look at, what reviewers have said, what journalists have said, what other academics have said about a certain book. And then I just say what I agree with and what I don't agree with. And I engage with both in a lot of ways. I think we are running out of time. Any last questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. This is a very general question, but I do not have I have a science class, but what are professors looking for on labs? Yeah. I was like in my head, I'm trying to remember so many years ago when I learned this whole thing about complete sentences. So I'm spending all this time writing complete sentences, repeating the question and then writing finally the answer. Are professors okay with short, quick answers that aren't complete sentences? Yes?
Especially Dr. Clary.
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
You should have seen, okay.
As long as you have the thought and you
ask
have the
that.
answer in there, you're fine. You don't have to be like a crazy, crazy
Because I don't
detail.
want it to look like I'm just filling the paper with all the stuff to look like I know what
He's
I.
fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's.
That's a good question. Yeah, want to wrap up? Go for it. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming and for attending online. Thank you for the great chats.